Oh, next up, we've got a treat, a snatch ladder. I love this style of events, and I know they're really fan-friendly, exciting events. You know, we've been doing this format of lifting ladder for years now at the games, and I think it's a great format. It's kind of fun because, you know, obviously strength is a big part of being the fittest, but it can't be the only thing. And so sometimes people are curious about, like, why not just do a straight up 1 rep max snatch or clean and jerk? And the thinking is kind of the same as, well, why don't we just do a straight up marathon, or why don't we just do a 100-meter dash? Those tests exist elsewhere, and while absolutely the components of those tests contribute to the fittest person, we have never felt the need to replicate those exactly. So this style, not only does it demand strength on the top end, but it demands the stamina to be able to repeat that strength multiple times in a pretty narrow window. There's also the gamesmanship of when do you go and when do you rest. You have to know your own limits and your abilities as a lifter. So pretty exciting style of event. And I'm sure that most of you guys out there watching have seen some of the classic battles that have unfolded in the past lifting ladders. What's not seen in these types of events is how much planning has to go into them to make it right. You know, it unfolds so quickly when you watch it, but there's a lot of tinkering that has to go on with these ones because you need a weight that's going to be challenging, but it doesn't preclude too many people. You know, it's okay if some people don't make it through it, that's expected and totally fine, but you can't put it so far out of reach that it just eliminates everybody right out the gate. On the other end of that, it can't be too easy, otherwise it's just a speed test of repetition, which again, that can be okay, but you're not going to get the same kind of separation and the same kind of, you know, best performance out of the athletes if it's just weights that they all don't have to think about and they know that they can make every single rep. So the loading has to be right, takes a lot of tinkering to get that where you need it to be. Second thing is how much time you give to lift has to be considered. And so for this one, you know, we've got a minute for the first round, second round gets 2 minutes, third round gets 3 minutes. And again, you want enough time for people to work so that they can get a couple of attempts in there if they miss, but not so much time that you're just kind of leaving somebody out there dangling on the field, and the competitors that have finished get extra rest that way too. So you have to find that sweet spot of a working window. And then the last thing to consider is the rest window. Again, you want enough time that you can kind of give the athletes a bit of a break for best performance. We want those guys showing up and giving their best lifts. But if you give too much time, you run the risk of losing the momentum of the event. People start to cool down, the crowd cools off, all of that stuff. So a lot to tinker with this particular event, and this year was no exception. It took us a while to land on these weights and these time frames, etc. So you'll notice with the men's weight, we've got a bit of overlap. You know, the first round ends at a certain weight, and then the next round picks up at that weight. And part of the reason we did that is if we just did linear jumps, it was going to be really tricky to find a weight at the beginning that would have been heavy enough to be challenging, and then didn't push out the top end weight at the very end to be way too aggressive. So we had to compress things just a little bit to find that sweet spot where the first round everybody should be able to make the weights, but the best will still be able to separate themselves. And then at the final round, we've got a heavy enough flight of weights that's going to be challenging to the best, but still attainable. So on the women's side, because we did the 5-pound jumps, the linear path all the way through that gave us that spread that we were looking for, but it just wasn't quite possible with the men's. So we got a bit of a repeat. But you know, we tested this a whole bunch of times, and the feeling on both the men's and the women's side was pretty close. And that's, you know, Dave, as much as you want to draw on the data, and we do that all the time, we take a look at what we've done in the past and best efforts from the athletes and all that kind of stuff, and consider those when we're creating the loads. But one of the key things when we're on site, and Dave talks about this all the time, is what does it feel like when you have to do it? What's the result of the athlete when they're done the event? Does it kind of hit that intuitive feeling? And Dave's really clued into that kind of thing. So it's always important for us to see this one play out multiple times. Yeah, when we watched this event, we were happy with the desired outcome. You can see Scott right at the end there. He's leaning over a little bit. He's obviously fatigued. He had to think about making a couple of those weights. He missed a couple in the middle round, I think. Brandon was close to making it through that second bar on the third round, but couldn't quite do it. So it's right on that cusp of achievable, like we've been talking about in some of these other events. It's right at that window of the best can separate themselves, but for those that aren't quite there, it's going to be a separator. These type of events really reward confidence, and so I think on both the men's and the women's side, the winner is somebody that can step up and know their abilities and have the right amount of rest, manage the pressure of the competition that's happening around them, and not miss. I think it's really important on these events that the wasted effort of a miss really puts you behind. So that's one of the kind of interesting psychological aspects of these events is you have some lifters that they're going to take a look left, right, and they're going to be pressured into going too soon and miss a lift, and that's going to just bury them, and now that fatigue factor is going to be really hard to overcome. So I think the winners of these events typically are the people that know where they're at, and they've got that ability to monitor people around them but not let it pressure them into going early and then not miss. I think that's going to be key to this event. Now, if you guys watched the previous behind the scenes video where we were talking about the toes to bar and walking lunge, we danced around the issue a little bit. We didn't want to be so overt because this hadn't been announced yet, but that combination of movements, a heavy deadlift and toes to bar, when we stepped back and looked at it in the greater context of what these guys would have to do in the snatch ladder later on, we thought that was going to be, number one, a little bit too much pulling. We probably wouldn't get the best performances out of the athletes. And the grip fatigue from deadlifting heavy and toes to bar in the same event wouldn't have set them up for success either. So, we expect a certain level of fatigue out of these guys and being able to perform under fatigue, of course. But we also want best performances and for them to showcase what they've been training all year for. So with that in mind, that's part of the reason we went back to the drawing board on that deadlift toe to bar workout.